Now I would like to open it out to a Q&A. We can have questions directed towards one panelist or another, or keep it very general because I feel like all of them really could answer any of these questions, talking about the programs, the awards. The first question I want to put out there is for Fulbright. If there is someone that is living as an American, living abroad, could they still apply for these Fulbright programs?
Yes. Short answer, yes. Long answer is it depends. The answer to almost everything having to do with a Fulbright award of all sorts is it depends, because there's a lot of variability. Typically, you cannot apply for a Fulbright U.S. student program from a country where you're currently resident, but you can apply for it anywhere else. So if you were, say, entering your senior year this year as an undergraduate, and you were doing, which is not going to happen, but if you were doing, say, study abroad in the UK, you could not apply for a UK award for next year from the UK. You could apply to do, say, the Spain English teaching assistantship while you were on that study abroad to the UK. That's not universal, but in almost every instance, most countries do prohibit folks who are currently in country from applying for that following award year.
Got it. So speaking of these international experiences, opening this up to all of the panelists, what international experiences in your professional development was especially influential to your current career and choosing your careers?
Okay, I can speak about this. So I went abroad. So actually I studied abroad in Spain, and then I went back to Spain after college with the idea of teaching English as a foreign language. And I ended up living in Madrid for a year, then went on to the UK for 6 years where I got a master's degree and continued working. But I think that experience in Spain, even though Spanish is not a less commonly taught language per se, but that was just such a transformative experience to be immersed in another culture, immersed in another language. And then when it came time to apply to grad school, I had really interesting experience that I could put in my personal statement that, that I actually worked abroad and that I had language skills. And I feel like that kind of set the ball in motion. And then, coming from the UK back to DC, that was more international experience. So I think it tends to build on itself once the ball gets rolling and you're sort of down that path. But I think Spain was kind of the initial thing that sort of set it all off in motion.
I can answer too. For me, I was an undergraduate, and at the time as an undergraduate, I was studying Russian. So I spent a year in St. Petersburg, Russia. And then and then I took basically 7 months to backpack around Asia, and then I worked for a year. And then by the time I went to graduate school, I started studying Arabic. So what actually took me on my career path now is I did the Bourne Fellowship. So I was a Bourne Fellowship recipient in 2007 and 2008. I was in Yemen and Syria. And that basically took me down this job path now. I had my service opportunity or requirement, quote unquote. And I ended up actually getting a job with Defense Language and National Security Education Office. At the time, it was just the National Security Education Office. And I've stayed there for 10 years and just have grown immensely with the organization and just been promoted. And that's been really great.
That's great. It's great to hear just different pathways, different journeys in language careers, because I feel like sometimes students think that they need to take a certain journey with where they want to go, but it's just not as linear as one might think at some point. So within your program, off the top of your head, do you know anybody or any sort of different paths that you've seen students take with their language journey?
I guess I can talk about that one too. I mean, I feel like students take multiple different paths. I think to remain open to the different opportunities that exist. And often, unless you're going to academia or translation, the language itself, it's a very marketable skill, but it's the language combined with the other things you do. So the language, unless you're doing something that's solely focused on language, like an academic path or a translation sort of path, is really a tool that you're going to use in your professional career to connect with others, Obviously, you study another language or live somewhere else, you're going to understand that culture a lot better. So it's combining your language skills and like the knowledge you gain if you do go abroad with other skills that you have to kind of, make yourself the most marketable. So, there's so many different paths people can go on, because there's many different careers people can pursue. And I really see language, unless you really want to focus on, language in itself, as augmentation to those skills that you already have. And having that language will allow you to then work in it with an international scope, because you will be able to communicate with people and then also have a proven track record, even if you're not working in that region, with cross-cultural work and what that entails.
And Kaveri, about the language flagship, do students typically end up working domestically or abroad? What have you seen the difference with that?
I mean, both. I mean, we'll work both. People do stuff like the foreign service, or they can be working domestically if they're in the private sector. Maybe they'll be abroad for a company. Maybe they'll be, in the US. But for sure, most of them are, engaging with abroad in whatever region that they're there, whether they're living there or not. A lot of people, maybe if they're living in the US, they're traveling a lot abroad to kind of do their work and engage with it.
Also, what sort of majors do you think that with these awards and these fellowships that people are really looking at considering, and maybe in careers as well? Do you think that there is a specific type of major, or do you think it's just a really broad aspect with you? This is open to all panelists as well, so you can give your different opinions.
All right, I'll jump in real quick. One of the things that I note, certainly from the larger funders, in particular Fulbright, is each country is different in terms of who it says it might be looking for or prioritizing. Countries don't always state it, but oftentimes there is a preference stated. But I can't tell you how many times I've seen applicants who read that stated preference and then take themselves out, or are inclined to take themselves out of the running. I kind of often try to talk them out of it, because there is a reason organizations give a stated preference and stated requirements. Preferences might be who they think they're looking for, but if the right application comes through and a stellar application comes through, they don't want to exclude those folks. And you see that all of the time, and across the board, Fulbright's really good about, and in all of these organizations, they're looking for less people coming at it from certain fields and more with a clear goal and a clear project in mind and a direction. And that's what becomes really, really important, that the language study, that the project that you're hoping to pursue makes sense within your personal and sort of career arc. And so I'd say if any of these programs that we've been talking about look attractive to you and you meet the eligibility requirements, don't second guess yourself. Don't worry about GPA. Don't worry about what your major is. Pursue them, because if it makes sense to you, you can probably make the case that it makes sense to the funders as well.
Yeah, I can follow up on that. Oh, sorry, I can follow up on that. Go ahead. I think, yeah, again, different scholarship. I mean, all of them are going to be different. So the different opportunities you're looking at, you'll have to look at their preferences. But I agree with Mark. They're called preferences. It doesn't mean you're going to be taken out of the running. But I think when you're really thinking about your career, it's not, I wouldn't think of it so much as what language major is the most competitive, because that's not really the way it works. I think you need to, I mean, again, your language major will help you build skills for what you want to do. I think you need to think about it more in terms of what do you want to do? Where do you want to be working? What kind of things, even like what do you want to do on the day-to-day? What people do you want to be surrounded by? What kind of culture do you want to be around? Like, where do you see yourself? And then work backwards from there as far as, I guess, selecting a major and then deciding what major would be most fruitful to get you to your goals.
Yeah. I think that sounds great. If there were any certain qualities or certain experiences, what do you think that there would exist that make applicants really stand out for applying to these programs and these awards?
I mean, I can talk again. Sorry, I feel like I'm dominating this conversation, but I can. So, I mean, again, I think Mark really hit it in the nail on the head in the last comment he made. I think what makes people really stand out for awards is authenticity and being genuine. I think when you have the opportunity to, I mean, the essay, for example, is your opportunity to talk about yourself, really. It gives you more of an opportunity than other places. And I think basically applications that are most compelling are those that were genuine and authentic. Someone who's put some time and thought about kind of what they want to do and how this fits into their goal in an interesting way versus just writing what they think the reviewers want to hear. So I mean, I find the most compelling applications are ones that are really tied together, and where you can feel the person has spent the time to think through what they want to do and how, you know, whatever they're applying for will fit into those plans, and how it all connects. So my biggest advice to applicants is to, you know, take time on the front end and to really flesh that out for yourself, and really, you know, ask yourself some questions like, why do you want to do this? Why, you know, how does this make sense for you, and how does it fit into your bigger plan, versus just, I'm not saying you guys are doing this, but versus just chasing whatever the trendy argument is of the day.
Mm-hmm. So if people really are uncertain of the path that they necessarily want to take, you would advise them to really think about it and be more specific and have an outline of their goals.
Yeah, I mean, just some general introspection a little bit. And even if you don't know, you can, you know, write certain things that you may be interested in. And by looking at these different opportunities, that can help also flesh out the things that you may be interested in by doing some research before you apply.
Mm-hmm. And I think with this next question, Mark touched on this with Fulbright, but when do you think students should start applying for these programs and awards, and how competitive do you think they are?
Immediately. As soon as you want to be, if you're interested in any of these opportunities, you need to be looking into them as soon as you become aware of them. And it always pays to pay attention of figuring out and doing that reflective work. When will I become eligible, and when will I become competitive in, you know, for these various awards? But you know, just to reiterate my last point, these are awards unlock awards. And so knowing sort of and talking and finding out what's available to you and then what makes the most sense for where you are often sort of starts that process of just sort of working through the whole host of them. You can't apply for everything. You're not eligible for everything, but knowing what's out there and what's appropriate is vitally important. The other thing with a lot of these larger awards, Bourne, Fulbright most especially, they have a very long application period and sort of lead out. So with Fulbright, the national deadline is almost a year before you would actually take up the award. So current freshmen, sophomores can and should be thinking about it, because when you're at the end of your junior year is when you're first eligible to apply, for instance, for a Fulbright U.S. Student Program Award. So the earlier you're thinking about it and mapping some of these things out and having discussions, I'd argue the better off you're going to be.
And also considering the application, what sort of references, if they're needed, do you think really make applicants stand out?
I was just going to build briefly on what Mark was saying, especially about the point of awards leading to more awards, because at KARC, we don't tend to give grants to undergraduate students as much, but we see people when they're at the PhD level. And when we're looking at applications that come through for our fellowships, we see many of these programs that the panelists are talking about on their application. And so that's definitely something that the reviewers look closely at if someone's had a Fulbright or, you know, any of these kind of big name sorts of programs. And then of course, they're also looking at the language skills. If someone wants to go to, you know, Morocco and go out into the field or something in a country and interview people, do they have the language skills to actually be able to go out into communities to do these things? And so it's definitely, you know, further down the road. I mean, all these things become essential too as you continue to apply for different types of grants. And we get a lot of Fulbright or former Fulbrighters who apply for our awards. I mean, it's something we see pretty frequently. So a lot of these things kind of complement each other, but yeah, just to sort of build on that, then, and definitely they tend to be quite competitive, at least for the PhD level. I can't speak to undergrad, but oftentimes, you know, the success rate is like 8% or something, depending on what it is you're applying for. So it can be very competitive, and the earlier you start, the better.
Yeah, I want to add to that too. I feel like most of these awards are quite competitive, but there is something to be said about, I mean, again, like as Mark said, you have a certain bandwidth, so apply what you're eligible for. But basically, applying for awards is an art. It's something that's learned. So you know, apply early. Start thinking about it early, because you're going to want lots of people to review it and give you feedback, so you can refine and put your best foot forward when you do put the final application in. And again, I feel like once you've applied a bunch of times for things, you kind of get more of a hang for it and get better and better as you go through. And you're going to be applying for things your entire career, whether it's jobs, whether it's more advanced awards. But anyway, you're going to be applying for things your entire career. So it's good to kind of start getting into the swing of things now, so you start really building that skill.
Mm-hmm. Going off of that, do any of you off the top of your head have any good references or resources that students could look at when applying for these applications? Just general checking in to see if their application really looks good, just tips and tricks.
Oh, I was going to let you go. Like I said, talk to people. If you're not here on UW-Madison, talk to me here on UW-Madison, or if you are here on UW-Madison, talk to me. Folks in the National Resource Centers, as Sachin was talking about, are incredible resources. They've got the regional and country-specific expertise. One of the things that we do for Fulbright U.S. student program applications is we have anonymized versions of past successful applications available. So, you know, and regardless of whether you're here at UW-Madison or at another campus, there are resources like that are going to be available to you. And it's not all going to be cookie cutter and look the same at all campuses, but there are folks to talk to, and there are those sorts of resources available. The funders often have incredible resources on their website. Fulbright is, for the U.S. student program and for the scholar program, is fantastic in terms of their outreach, webinars, previous recorded webinars being available. And I can't believe that any of us here as representatives doing the outreach wouldn't be more than happy to talk directly with anyone who had questions. And if we couldn't answer questions, to refer folks on to others in our organizations that would be able to provide some of those answers, some of that feedback that can be really crucial to putting forward a successful application.
Mm-hmm. I was going to say, same with Mark, most campuses do have offices that specialize in scholarship advising. And for some of the bigger awards like Fulbright and Bourne, for example, especially for the undergraduate awards, many have internal campus deadlines. So you're going to be having to work with your campus anyway to meet the internal campus deadlines before the actual award date.
And speaking of those webinars and seminars, what ones do you see like coming up recently, like this summer? If there are any.
There are lots, and it really I think depends on the program that they're pursuing. Well, lots. Like for instance, Fulbright U.S. student program, we're about a little less than 2 months out from the campus deadlines and 3 months out from the national deadlines. So they're tending to sort of peter out a little bit, although I know Fulbright's got some webinars coming up to chat with alumni, program alumni in the coming week. That said, Bourne is ratcheting up. Bourne applications will be opening up in August, and Jeff Carey, who I know is on one of the other panels here, he leads we had him in with a webinar last year and hoping to get him again in person this year. And those are just be firing up. And so sitting down and looking at these awards and understanding the timeline, you can sort of back out and figure out when those webinars open up, live webinars, but also, like I said, a lot of these organizations are doing a fantastic job of recording and making the resources available, even, you know, sort of not live. And so someone who's coming in, for instance, to the Fulbright US student program rather late in the process, you know, still has access to an incredible treasure trove of resources for general information and to get them situated. And I think that's becoming more the norm than the outlier these days.
Yeah, I was just going to add that it really does depend on the timeline, as Mark was saying, of these different types of grants and fellowships. So webinars, you know, might pop up. As I know some of our centers occasionally will have a grant writing workshop, and a lot of times it's by discipline, and they come up periodically, but it really does depend on each place's sort of timeline for these programs. And many, as Mark was saying, have these pre-recorded ones that you can access on websites. So it's worth exploring the websites of these different funding organizations and seeing what they have and marking it on your calendar if there's something that's going to be opening up in a few months to kind of watch their social media and website.
And I just see that Carrie has asked a question if there is a class info session coming up soon as well. Mark, do you know if there is?
No, not quite yet. The application for FLAS should open sometime in mid-November for this coming summer and the following academic year. And we'll start having information sessions about the same time. We usually try to get our first information session in before Thanksgiving break. And then we'll have 2 or 3 between Thanksgiving and the start of winter break, and usually try to have maybe 1 or 2 or 3 come when we come back from winter break too.
And I know that there is mention of applying for these programs and awards as soon as possible. Do you think that this applying early really gives students kind of an edge with like being accepted to these awards and programs, or do you think it's really up in the air depending on the application?
I don't think there's anything necessarily inherently benefit or sort of they'll give you a leg up from applying early. I think where the benefit comes from is, as Kaveri was noting, getting to work on it early. And so giving yourself that extra time and to work on things, and also giving yourself the time to share it out with as many different people as possible and getting feedback from as wide a net as possible. And frankly, so that the process isn't rushed and is less stressful for you. And for the people who you are inevitably asking to do some work on your behalf, because all of these applications come with requesting recommendations. And if you're applying a week out from a deadline, that's great. You might be able to get it done. Are you going to go back to faculty members and say, hey, I need a letter of recommendation in a week? That doesn't particularly go over well, especially if you're going to be wanting to ask them for a recommendation for a Bourne and then for additional programs down the line. So I think that the starting early is just useful in the whole process, not necessarily inherent to making you more competitive when it comes to the review process.
Mm-hmm. From a personal experience of applying to programs probably a little bit later than I should, definitely reaching out to references early is much appreciated on the reference end, and you will definitely be getting back better references if you reach out early than if you reach out too late. All right, well, if any of the participants have any further questions, there will be information. It is on the LCTL site under exhibitor list. All of our panelists are featured there as well, along with contact information. If you do find yourself having a question later on or a question about any of the applying for these awards, applying for these programs, feel free to message them through there. And now I just want to say thank you to our wonderful panelists and to our participations this afternoon. We appreciate your time and hope you enjoyed the career fair. If you have any further questions or wish to get in contact with them, you may email WISL Careers or visit the exhibitor page like I mentioned. If you wish to see the other panels, we will be posting the recording of the event on the website as well as the WISLI Facebook page. There also is now a What's Next tab on the LCTL website with more information of how you can continue with your language learning journey. And I just want to say again, thank you for attending and have a great evening. I'll send this little message here with the links if people want to use those right away.